Seated. Okay. I like to say that I'm making good time on this study, but I got a little ways to go. Last week we started covering verse 27, and I'd like to start just reading that. I'm not going to do a lot of backpedaling here, but just give you a brief overlay. He says there in verse 27, Daniel chapter 9, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. There's a lot in one verse there. It's pretty much covering the last 42 months called the Great Tribulation in one verse. And we want to define as best we can everything that's in that verse. We talked about the covenant. And this to me was something I didn't see until I really started looking into it and just reading Daniel chapter 9 and seeing what Daniel was thinking about and praying about in his prayer and his confession, and he mentions the covenant. And he's talking about the Mosaic covenant. And this is how the Antichrist is going to get his inroad. He's going to come back, or let's put it this way, he's going to show up however you believe he's going to show up. If you think he's born in Europe and being groomed right now for the job, that's fine if you want to believe that. I personally don't believe that. I believe he'll come out of the sky. Just as he mimicked Christ's first coming, I believe that he will mimic or duplicate his second coming. He'll come out of the sky. Anything coming out of the sky right now that, ET and extraterrestrial, believe me, the world's going to take note of. And if it has special powers, that even better. I believe that he'll come down in support of Israel right away. And he'll talk about a 7-year treaty, which is actually him confirming the covenant and saying that the world needs to make a treaty with Israel for 7 years and allowing them to start up their sacrificial system, build their temple, and at the end of those 7 years promise a 1,000-year peace accord. And that he's got the power to bring that to pass or allow that to happen. And this is going to, Israel's waiting for this. What they don't realize was that their true Messiah came 2,000 years ago and they crucified him. So when this guy shows up, he's the ultimate deception because he's who they're praying for to come. They just don't realize that he already showed up once. So they're going to take the wrong. It's always the first one. There's this thing that God establishes in the Bible. It's not Cain, it's Abel. It's not Esau, it's Jacob? Yeah, it's not Esau, it's Jacob. It's not the first. It's always that second one that shows up. And it's uncanny how that thing happens throughout the Bible. Listen, the first person to come out of the sky to claim to be the Messiah is the wrong one. Y'all know that now? So if somebody comes tomorrow, you'll know it's wrong, okay? Lord willing, we'll be out of here before it happens, but if not, maybe we'll go up the same time they come down. That's been, some folks have thought about that happening, that when the Antichrist comes down, at the same time we're going up. We just pass him along the way saying, see ya. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Now, we talked about Israel's plans to rebuild the temple. It's all ready. All the construction materials are ready. The garments are ready. They've even got the crown for the high priest is ready. They have everything ready to begin construction of that temple. They just have to have the cooperation of the nations. You know why they need that? Because that thing's all quartered about, and you got one part that belongs to the Palestinians, one part that belongs to the Muslims, and then one part belongs to the Catholics, and one part belongs to the Jews. I think it's segregated like 4 different, and there's going to have to be a consensus, not to blow it up every day or shoot somebody that's working on the temple. You understand? They need the cooperation of the nations, and they need a few things to get this thing going. And I don't know whether they'll have all these things or not. But the ashes of the red heifer, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about the Urim and Thummim, which I'm not sure what it is. All I know is that when it's joined to that ephod, however that is, I don't know if it's a liquid, I don't know what it is. But when it's joined with that ephod, where those stones, there are 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel, it can identify their tribe. So if somebody comes up and says, you know, I'm of Levi, or I'm a Kohathite, or whatever, or Merarite, which are the priestly line there, then this thing could verify whether they're from Levi or not. And so they kind of need that, because most Jews don't know what tribe. They don't know if they're Benjamin or Asher or Gad. They have no idea. They have no idea. There is something about the priest, in that the priests were forbidden to change their names. So whatever nation they wound up in, they kept that Cohen. See, Levi had 3 sons, and they called them the Merarites, the Kohathites, and I just said it. Merarites, Kohathites. Nope, I can't remember it. That's that 6-second memory I got now. I just said it. Kohathites, Merarites, Gershonites, thank you. Oh, I didn't say it. The Gershonites. But those are the ones who took care of all the things of the temple, and they were each given different tasks of what they were to take care of. But if you don't know what tribe you're from, you can't just have somebody from Benjamin start going into the temple and doing stuff. That won't work. So they're going to have to figure that thing out. Then we talked about the Ark of the Covenant and finding that thing. And if they find that ark, man, I'm telling you what, get your bags packed. I mean, we're close. It wouldn't surprise me, you know, one of these days there'll be a headline in the newspaper, you know, and ark has been, they found the Ark of the Covenant, you know, and inside are the stone, or the testimony, or the commandments written in stone. Is what I'm trying to say. The tables of stone. That's what I wanted to say. That would be amazing. I kind of like to see how God just laser wrote those, wouldn't you? Yeah, you'd like to see it too. And probably nothing. I'm sure it's nothing that could have been reproduced during that time frame. I don't know. World still wouldn't believe it. They just say that Jews manufactured it or something. You know, anything to. But anyway, what'd you say?
I said Times New Roman.
Times New Roman. Ah.
It would definitely be Helvetic.
Yeah. But the issue here is the fact that he says there in the midst of the week he causes the sacrifices and the oblation to cease. And you know that the altar has to be in place and the temple's being built. They're not going to start making sacrifices on an altar without the idea that the temple is coming very shortly. They're just not going to do that. And one of these days, all they have to do is get permission from everybody involved, and they can rear up an altar and they can begin sacrifices in a matter of a week or two. I believe it could be that quick. So this temple, we talked a little bit about that, and I want to show you something. Look at Matthew 26. I told you that the Antichrist, he has the greatest regard for this temple. The passage I showed you, I believe, last week where Judas is showing Jesus the buildings of the temple, everything that's involved there. And he's just fascinated with it. He says, Master, look at the... And then Jesus begins to tell him the prophecy that not one stone will be upon another. It's all going to be destroyed. I mean, just like Judas to concentrate on the wrong thing, but he's concentrating on the thing he wants. That's why he is the son of perdition, John chapter 17. But he says there, where I tell you to go? Oh, here we go. Matthew 26, verse 50. And he says, Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. I mean, he calls the son of perdition friend. He's even the one that chose him, by the way, on purpose. Have I not chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil? And he says, friend, but it's not said in the sense that you say to, this is my good friend. It's like, friend, wherefore art thou come, you know? And what's going to happen here is Israel is going to get help from a false friend. They're going to get help from a false friend. Let me show you something I saw in Ezra. And I know I'm not the first to see it. I think Doc even has a note on it. But look at Ezra chapter 6. When Ezra goes back into the land, and his primary purpose is to set up the altar and rebuild the temple. That's what you're reading when you're reading the book of Ezra. But look what it says here in Ezra chapter 6. Look at verse 22. Start at verse 21. And the children of Israel, which were come again out of captivity, and as all such as had separated themselves unto them from the filthiness of the heathen of the land, to seek the Lord God of Israel, did eat, and kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy. For the Lord, now watch this, for the Lord had made them joyful, and turned the heart of the king of Assyria unto them, to strengthen their hands in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. Now what's interesting here is they're under Persia. They're under Artaxerxes. He's a king of Persia. They're not even under Assyria, yet he uses the phrase king of Assyria. Now you'll find that happening a lot, especially when if Persia were to conquer Assyria, well, whoever they put in place there would be the king of Assyria. Like you'll find that Darius is the king of Babylon. Why? He's a Persian, but they conquered Babylon. Now he's the king. So I understand that, but out of the blue, all of a sudden, this king of Persia, or king of Assyria, and that is a title of the Antichrist, the king of Assyria. And notice he turned his heart, and what does he do? He strengthened their hands in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. That's what's going to happen. When the Antichrist shows up and he confirms this covenant and Israel begins their sacrifice, it is going to be his main concern, or his main focus is to help them in building the temple. He is going to strengthen their hands so that they can. And this is going to get him brownie points with the Jews. Oh, this wonderful person here, this wonderful man, this powerful supernatural man is helping us, he's a prophet of God. Now, he hasn't come out and declared himself as God Almighty. Not yet. But they're going to get help from this false friend, just as Judas was a false friend to Jesus Christ. Look at Isaiah chapter 10. Just give you a couple references about this king of Assyria. Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against a hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil, and to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. I mean, the Antichrist is used like a hammer or a whip against Israel. And God is actually using him as an instrument of judgment against his own people. Why? Because, you didn't have to ask why. They crucified their Messiah, and they continue in disbelief. Look at verse 12. Wherefore shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks. He's talking about the Antichrist there. It may be talking about someone in history, but it is primarily dealing with the Antichrist and his high looks. He's going to exalt himself and claim to be God. And the Lord is going to use that and then turn around and punish him. That's what the Lord does. You say, what if America puts their hand against the Jew? He blessed America for not putting our hand against the Jew, for blessing the Jew. He will punish us if we put our hand against them. He may even use us to help punish them and then turn around and punish us. Why? Because he told you not to. I can't help it, everybody standing in line to punish that Jew. But you don't want to be the one doing it. So the Lord can use, He can use the Antichrist as a judgment against His people and then turn right around and then judge the Antichrist. Now you might find that hypocritical, but it's not. Both are in the, well, Israel's in a bad place, and the Lord's just trying to get them right. Look at Nahum. If I can find Nahum, I know it's back here in the Old Testament somewhere. Yep. Before Micah?
No, after.
I was going to say it's after Micah, isn't it? Okay.
Before Habakkuk.
It's right before Habakkuk and after Micah.
Okay. All right. Nahum chapter 3, verse 18 and 19. It says, "The shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Thy nobles shall dwell in the dust. Thy people scattered upon the mountains, and no man gathereth them. There is no healing of thy bruise. Thy wound is grievous. All that hear the bruit," that's a rumor, "of thee shall clap the hands over thee, for upon whom hath not thy wickedness passed continually?" You notice he mentions there the king of Assyria. And this bruit, or this rumor, has to do with him surrounding Jerusalem with an army. And here's a rumor that another army is on his tail somewhere, is kind of breach his kingdom, and he turns and tries to take care of what's going on. And this happened in history twice. It happened under Nebuchadnezzar, and it happened, it may even happen under Assyria, and I believe it may have even happened in 70 AD. I mean, when these things start repeating themselves, man, you better know that God's in this book, man. He's telling you exactly what's going to happen, and then shows you these examples in history where it happened. And so Israel's going to get some help, and it looks like they're going to get some help. Their help's going to come from the Antichrist in rebuilding that temple, and that's going to just make them happy. And I thought about this. I showed you. Turn to Revelation 13:13. We looked at this last week, but I want to talk about it just briefly again. You know, when the tabernacle was built, we looked at, I don't know if we've turned there, but Leviticus 9:24, fire falls from heaven and consumes the sacrifice, and it's from that fire that they begin their sacrificial system. They're never to let it go out. And then we looked at Solomon's temple. When it was dedicated, fire fell from heaven, consumed the sacrifice, and from that fire, all their sacrificial system mattered. If they couldn't just pull out their Bic lighter and light the candlesticks. They were never to go out. And there was always hot coals. There was always a fire from that original fire that God started. Anything else was considered strange fire. And then it dawned on me, that I don't ever remember reading where God answered by fire in the book of Ezra. And I can't find it. Now, maybe I'm just blind, can't see it, but I can't find where God started up the sacrificial system with His fire from heaven in the book of Ezra. And then I got to thinking, well, you know what? Why would He? Israel is not a nation at that time. They're under the heel of Persia. And then they go under the heel of Greece. Then they go under the heel of Rome. And when Jesus Christ shows up, that's where they're at. They're under the heel of Rome. They are not a self-governing nation. They are not an autonomous nation. So why would God start up their sacrificial system?
Yeah, they still consider themselves in the Roman exile.
Even today? In Roman exile?
They have 4 exiles, and they are still in the Roman exile.
Or there's still some in the exile that need to be brought back, maybe. But they're a nation.
Eric tells me they're still in Roman exile.
Okay. Give that some thought. I realize that those that are still there, but the ones that are back on the land aren't in exile anymore. They're home. I don't know. Anyway, in Revelation 13:13, let me just set the stage. Can you imagine this? This being shows up from outer space. He not only has a magnetic personality, but he has powers to heal. And I mean, when we're not talking Benny Hinn style healing, we're talking the real thing. And he has these signs and wonders, which 2 Thessalonians says, lying signs and wonders. And he's able to do things that no human being has been able to do on this earth since Jesus Christ was here. So that wins him right there. Everybody's got their eyes on him. And then he says, you know, he is a friend of Israel, and that they ought to be allowed to build their temple. They ought to be allowed to make their sacrifices, and that he goes before the UN and he strikes up a deal and he says, you need to leave them alone. A 7-year treaty. Confirm this covenant with the world. This is what they need to do. And then they build the temple in record time, under 3 years. Everything's ready, and they're getting ready for their dedication. What do you think would seal the deal? Look at verse 13. Now, it's not actually the Antichrist, it's the false prophet, but look what happens. Verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Now we'll talk about that later. And he doeth great wonders, and so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Now what do you think that fire's coming down for? I can tell you. When they're going to dedicate that third temple, third and final temple, he causes the fire of God to come down and consume the sacrifice. Now, something's already happened before that. He's received a deadly wound. He's died, okay? And 3 days later he comes back to life. Actually, it's more of a bait and switch deal. But anyway, he comes back to life. So that gets their attention, I'm sure. And then he calls down fire from heaven and says, I'm your Messiah. I'm the Christ. I'm the Mashiach. I'm the king. He sits on that temple, and he no more gets on that temple, and you know what the false prophet says? It says to the world, you need to make an image to the beast. You need to make an image to this great man. So they make an image, and then he does something to supernaturally empower this image to cause both small and great, rich and poor, bond and free, to take the mark of the beast. But I'll tell you what, anybody call down fire from heaven is going to convince those Jews, at least momentarily. Now you know why when he puts the that abomination that maketh desolate, which is the next thing we're going to talk about here, a part of verse 27, it says the overspreading of abominations. That's what he's referring to. Look at Matthew 24:15. He probably could have kept up the deception for a lot longer without anybody getting the wiser, because it says he'd almost deceived the elect. In fact, you know, for a good portion of Israel, most of them are deceived into believing that he is the true Messiah. But in Matthew 24, verse 15, it says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, that's what he's referring to, the overspreading of abominations. Because the next phrase says, he shall make it desolate. The abomination of desolation is spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Stand in the holy place. Whosoever readeth, let him understand. Now, he's not talking about the Antichrist being in the temple. He's talking about an idol. He's talking about an image. And it's not in the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. It's in what we call I just tripped over my own words. It's in what we call the holy place. It's the first compartment where the furniture is, where you have the candlestick, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, and what am I missing? Is that right? 3 of them? Yeah, that's the traveling prayer thing into the Holy of Holies. So you've got 3 pieces of furniture, and all of a sudden, evidently, he's going to stand this image up inside there. When they see that image, they know right then and there they've been schnookered, they've been hoodwinked, they've been deceived, and they just let the devil in the temple. What's that? Schmeckled. Yeah, is that the word? It's going to be, oi, you know. Because look what happens. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. They're having to get out of the city or out of Jerusalem as fast as their feet can carry them. They're told, listen, they're told not even to go back inside and grab a coat because that'll cost you your life. The ones that don't get out are massacred, or they're actually, they get even put into slavery. They're made servants or whatever they do to them, but their life depends on them getting out as quickly as possible. Because he says, let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. If there's anything that's prophetic of an airport, it's that one right there. Nothing flies out of Tel Aviv on the Sabbath. And he said, you better pray this don't happen on the Sabbath day or in the winter when it's hard to just get out of there. It'll probably be some Hercules, DC-4, whatever, that they're loading up and flying out to the desert. As many people as they can get in these planes. And if it's on the Sabbath day, they'll never even get off the ground. Mark 13. I'm going to get to reconciling all those numbers up there, but I think you ought to know what's going on before we start talking about reconciling those. Mark 13, verse 14. It says, when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not. I love that. It shouldn't be there. Let him that readeth understand, then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. And let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of his house. And talk about the same one in the field. And it's pitiful, but anyone that's with child is not going to make it. That's how quick this is going to happen. And he goes from this big friend of the Jews and rebuilding the temple and setting up the sacrifices to wanting to annihilate them from the earth. And this is going to happen very quickly. Look at Revelation chapter 13. You know, what we don't realize is there's the Lord's Christ and there's the devil's Christ. If you go over there, and I believe it's Isaiah 14, it could be Ezekiel 28, it talks about the anointed cherub. That's that word for Christos or Christ or Mashiach, which is the Hebrew word for king. And you know what? Lucifer used to be a king. God gave him a throne. He's anointed. And he wants that throne back. In fact, he doesn't, not the throne he had, he wants God's seat. And that's the reason why he's going after that temple. Where did I go to? What did I tell you? Revelation 13, verse 11 to 15. He says there, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. We just read that, didn't we? Verse 14 and 15, and he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast. So the false prophets got the ability to do miracles also, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. I have no idea what that's going to involve, but I mean, if you can imagine some sci-fi book, you know, where, I mean, it all started out with Hal. You know that, don't you? You know who Hal was. Hal opened the bay doors. What is it? What's the movie? 2001 Space Odyssey. Remember that movie where the computer takes over, you know, starts thinking for everybody, and then all of a sudden it becomes homicidal? Huh? That's right. Well, if you can imagine the internet running your life, this thing will be plugged in. It will know everything about you. It will know how you move. I mean, listen, with all the cameras they've got, with all the technology that's out there, and with being able to supernaturally patch into that, this thing's going to be able to think and react. Look what it says. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. Now look at this. That the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This thing can make your household appliances come after you. I don't know how he's going to do it, but
Mass text message.
yeah, kill so-and-so at this address, they're anti-government. I don't know what they'll do, but if you can imagine being tracked down today, listen, it was amazing what the Germans could do, the Nazis could do during World War II when they were trying to find these Jews. It was amazing with no computers, just the information that they could compile. I mean, they did it with censuses. A census. The ones you fill out and you tell them everything about you and your household and who's in your house, and that's how they can discern. But imagine now with Facebook and all the information you put on there that the NSA has, and they want to query you. Why, man, they know where you're going to eat. They know where you're going to go. They know where your hangouts are. They know where your church is. They know everything about you. So it won't be hard once he can patch into this system to hunt down someone. Now, obviously not us. We're not going to be here. Thank God for that. Zechariah, look at Zechariah chapter 11. Zechariah chapter 11, verse 15 to 17. And the Lord said unto me, take unto thee yet the instruments of a foolish shepherd. For lo, I will raise up a shepherd in the land which shall not visit those that be cut off, neither shall seek the young one, nor heal that is broken, nor feed that standeth still, but he shall eat the flesh of the fat and tear their claws in pieces. Woe to the idol shepherd. Notice I-D-O-L, because he sets up the idol. The idle shepherd that leaveth the flock, the sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. Thus in history, you find examples of rulers that have bad right arms and bad right eyes. Hitler had a problem with his right arm, I believe, tremor-wise. It would shake or whatever, and he's doing this, but he's also keeping that hand tight. It was Napoleon that did this, something wrong with the right arm. Then bad right eyes, besides the Blackbeard. I don't know whoever won it. Made the pirate, but Moshe Dayan, one of the generals in Israel, had that patch over the right eye. And just examples that God's showing you. I believe Napoleon had a problem too. I believe it was a bad right arm. I don't know. I can't. It was? Okay. God does that to show you, man, over and over again. Look at Adolf Hitler. He a great example of the Antichrist, and then he puts his hand against that Jew who tries to exterminate him. And that's what the Antichrist is going to try to do. But that you say, well, who cuts him down? Well, probably one of his own. I mean, it's not like the devil doesn't want it to happen. He wants it to happen. He'll make it happen. But he would have to it'd be like this, and somebody, cutting him across his right eye, I don't know, or like broadside, he hit his right eye and his right arm. It would be like this. I can't tell. It'd be like, some ninja assassin, who knows who it is, and it doesn't really matter because he suffers a fatal wound and then is raised from the dead. Now you can just imagine when that happens, the attention he gets. So he sets up his image, and it's an idol, and the Bible calls it an abomination. And he begins to do things that we have examples in history for again. He begins to sacrifice. He stops the sacrificial system. Probably when he calls down fire, that's when he immediately stops the sacrifices. And he begins to sacrifice other things on the altar, like pigs, dogs, and then finally, saints. He's sacrificing human beings on that altar. Let me show you a couple verses on that real quick. Look at Isaiah 66. Verse 3, Now, of course, you know pigs are an unclean animal, Leviticus chapter 11. The Jews are forbidden to eat swine. Dogs are something that's unclean, Deuteronomy 23:18. These are two things that you absolutely would not offer on the altar of God. They're in the unclean animals section of the Bible. And of course, God never required human sacrifice. So in Isaiah 66 verse 3, notice that they're all there as a replacement for the proper sacrifice. He that killeth an ox as if he slew a man. There's the men that will be sacrificed. He that sacrificeth a lamb as if he cut off a dog's neck. And he that offereth an oblation, that's a free will offering, as if he offered swine's blood. He that burneth incense as if he blessed an idol. Probably standing right next to the altar of incense. Yea, they have chosen their own ways, and their soul delighteth in their abominations. So, Revelation chapter 6, let's look at the human sacrifice. You say, no. Well, I mean, who would have believed that 6 million Jews would be burned up in a bunch of ovens and buried in a bunch of lime pits? Who would have ever thought that somebody could mass exterminate people and you have engineers and scientists working on it? So don't tell me this can't happen. Revelation chapter 6, verse 9 to 11. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar. Why? That altar's been reared up again. The souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. He's killing them on the altar. And no doubt they're probably drinking blood. Okay? Which every good Roman Catholic would have no objection to, because they believe they're drinking blood every time that priest turns it into blood during the Mass. Ever thought about that? They don't believe it's spiritual. They believe in transubstantiation, that it literally becomes the body and blood of Christ. Is that not so? So they're going to have a problem with this? Why would they? They've been drinking blood for years, according to their own doctrine. And it says, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? So they're killing them. They're sacrificing them on those altars, and probably by guillotine. Looks like it's the method that's going to come back. Then the last part, he said, we have the overspreading of abominations. That's going to be not only the idol, but the sacrifices themselves are going to be unclean. And this is the devil, you know, this is the devil, how can I put it in the vernacular of the day, really just kind of flipping God off, if you really want to get down to it. This is his moment. He's sitting on his seat in his temple, on his altar, on his mercy seat, I guess, if he's got the ark underneath him, or sitting on his ark. And this is his, you know, I told you I'd sit in your chair, and I told you I'd be king, and here I am. You just better not take a long breath, because that's how long it lasted. And in a sense, he says, well, you can have that world, but when I come back, it's going to be a different world. And but he does get to sit in that seat. Let's see here. It says, the last part of verse 27 says, and he shall make it desolate. The word, you know, when we think about something being desolate, we think of it could be a city that's wiped out, but also could be the lack of inhabitants. And when it says that he makes Jerusalem desolate, or the land desolate, there's not a Jew anywhere, man. He's either deported them out of the country, or the ones have just scattered everywhere in the world. And so he's made that entire area a desolation because of setting up the abomination that maketh desolate. Look at Matthew 24. I'm kind of passing over. I feel like I weary some of you with all the passages, and I'm trying not to. You know how preachers get, we get verbose. And I really need to move on after this and talk about these numbers up here and these days and everything. Matthew 24 16. Boy, Matthew 24 is the verse when it comes to the tribulation and what's happening there. Verse 16 says, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So some are going to flee, but look at verse 19 to 22. Woe to them with a child, and them that give, or woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. There's going to be some that are going to flee. Notice in verse 21 that at the time he sets up this abomination that maketh desolate, there's a lot happening in the middle of the week. Now this is God's middle. In the middle of that week, there are so many things happening. There's his death, burial, and resurrection. There's the setting up the temple, dedicating the temple, fire coming down, setting up the image in the temple, or sitting in the temple. But then it says in verse 21, for then shall be great tribulation. You have 42 months from that point. Then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened. We will talk about that. You cannot forget that verse right there. Except those days should be shortened. Here's the problem. He just told you, in fact, he tells you at least 5 times in the Bible, in 3 or 4 different ways, that it is 42 months, 3.5 times, 1,260 days. All those are used. That's not shortened. That's not shortened. That's 3.5 years. So what does he mean, except those days be shortened? And where this chart fits, and where this chart speaks to that, it has it shortened right here. Why? Because part of it's already passed. And that's what I'm going to take you to. We're going to walk through this and see when it started, or as far as the 70th week, when it started, when God halted it, and when it picks up again, and will everything flow perfectly, that's going to match the feast, okay? And every other scripture that deals with this, is there going to be any conflict? All right, so stay tuned. Is there any questions about what we covered this morning?